Okay, tonight I'm going to talk about schemas. And the reason why I'm going to talk about schemas is because I find a lot of people really, they give you the syntax for creating schemas and they show you how to work with schemas, but they don't really tell you why you should work with schemas. So, one of the things I hope to to capture here is, a little bit of experience on exactly why you should be worrying about schemas and why schemas are actually one of the coolest things to come around, and the SQL Server world's been waiting for them for a long time. Oracle and the other guys have had them, and we finally get them here with Yukon, and they're just a fabulous thing. They allow you to do so many things that you couldn't do before. Now, I'll go ahead and start you off with the syntax as well, and then we'll talk about what schemas really mean, right? It's really easy. Create schema, say SSIS. I may already have that one. Let's see. Does that exist already? Okay, it already exists. Okay, so we'll call it SSIS2, right? There we go. That's good. Okay, so I just created a schema, SSIS2, and you've seen that there's an SSIS schema, and I'll show you where those guys live. Let me get rid of this. They live under security and schemas, and there's SSIS, and I have to refresh this for 2 to show up. I don't know why it's moving so slow tonight. There we go, and SSIS2. So there's our two schemas, and you see that the database comes loaded with schemas already, right? Now, what does this really mean? What is a schema, and what will you get out of it? Well, a schema is basically just a security group, right? If you have if you know much about database security and even Windows security too, I suppose, you have user accounts and you have user groups, right? And the groups are there to ease the burden of security management. So if you've got an object, if you've got 1,000 people that have to have access to hundreds of objects, then it's much easier to create a group and then just drop people inside that group, right? Well, schemas are the same thing for database objects, for tables and stored procedures and views and functions. So they're really just a security group for objects instead of for user accounts. And that's really the easiest way to explain it. And if you know how to use security groups inside SQL or inside Windows, then you automatically know what I'm talking about, and you automatically get the idea of what a schema is and what it's for. Now, back in SQL 2000, one of the hardest things to do was to manage objects owned by multiple users and give multiple users access to those objects. So what I mean by that is, let's say that you had an object owned by, here, and I'll just kind of type this out in the query editor here. It's not going to be SQL. But let's say you have SP1 owned by user 1, right? And you have SP2 owned by user 2. So the way that would work out is it would be user1.sp1 and user2.sp2. So that's exactly how that would work out, right? You would have the owner. The first part of this specifies the owner of the object, and the second part of it specifies the object itself. Well, that's kind of a schema, and actually schemas in Yukon and above, they work the exact same way, only they're a lot more flexible. So in 2000 and below, if I wanted to give somebody access to this guy right here, I would go on and I would grant execute to that specific SP, right? So I would have to say something like grant execute on to user 2, right? So I'd have to specifically give him access to that one object. But what if I want user 2 to be able to see all of my objects? And what if I've got, 100 users or 200 users or 1,000 users that need to have access to all of my objects? That's really tough because the problem with the way it was in 2000 and below was that it was it's just me who owns that object. It has nothing to do with any kind of formal security group. So if I went on to do this, user1.sp2, I would also have to do this for every single object that I created in the future. And I would have to do that for every single object that exists already when I give them permissions. So you can see how managing this is the same way as it is as managing, SQL users or Windows users without groups, right? I mean, it's very difficult. But instead, what I can do, let me go here. I'll go ahead and use a real account so that you can get an idea for what I'm talking about here. If I want to grant execute on schema SSIS2 to, I would do something like that, and I grant that on the schema, and then what I get is for every object that already exists in this schema, and for every object that will exist in the future in that schema, this user account already has execute rights on everything in that schema. So it's, I'm accessing the objects in that schema at a group level, right, instead of at an individual object level like I had to before. So that's really the crux of why schemas exist and what make them so cool. Now they give you lots of other benefits as well that we're going to talk about later. I'm having a hard time trying to figure out exactly where to divide this series up, but I think just this basic level discussion of what schemas are and why I should care about them is probably a good place to stop right now, and then I'll do some subsequent videos on how to work with schemas, some best practices with schemas, and and how to assign privileges and all that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this video right now, and that's just a quick overview of what schemas are for and why you should use them, and good luck with that. I hope you find that useful.